Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents KYLE SERAPHIN?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name. Familiar with the name.
Let's bring in KYLE SERAPHIN. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called KYLE SERAPHIN brought it to the public. And we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called the KYLE SERAPHIN Show.
KYLE SERAPHIN, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent KYLE SERAPHIN.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the KYLE SERAPHIN Show. Today is Thursday. It is April the 4th in 2024, and we are rolling live on rumble.com/KYLE SERAPHIN. Make sure you have hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I actually don't always talk this fast, but I'm amped up. Yeah, I gave myself extra time this morning because I knew I didn't have to prep for like a regular show. I just had to have my mind right because we're going to be talking to Steve Baker, my friend, suspendable, Blaze correspondent, Blaze media investigative reporter. So I wanted all the sleep that I could get, went to bed a little earlier than normal, gave myself a solid 8 and change hours, and like so many things, and Steve will be able to attest to this as well, when you make good plans, God just laughs in your face and says, you silly little man, you can't do that, because my daughter came in at before 5 a.m. and then spent the next hour and a half just kicking me, letting me know she was in my bed, taking up space. My wife was up feeding the baby in our guest bedroom. What a way to start the day. Can't make it up. That's just how it goes. Then we had some little audio issues, so we appreciate all of you all joining us, even though we are just a couple of seconds late on the stream. Not intentional and nothing nefarious, just a little bit of settings issues. Let me cover down on the sponsors that support our podcast, then we're going to get into however much time we want with Steve Baker with a hard cutoff at 11 Eastern time, because Dan Bongino is going to be talking about stuff that's near and dear to my heart. So here we go. Without wasting any time, my friends over at Patriot Coolers, you guys should check them out. We are working on uploading the vector files to them. The emails should be going back and forth so you can get your own Suspendables mugs. They don't have to have stickers on them. They can be this 16 ounce. They can be the 19 ounce that's sitting next to me. I am rocking on caffeine right now, and it is nice and warm because of my Patriot Cooler. You guys can get your own at patriotcoolers.com. The promo code is Kyle. It's KYLE. 4 little letters, saves you 10%. That's how you do it. PatriotCoolers.com. Check out their hard-sided coolers, too, if you guys are looking for something. If you are in the market for an upgrade, if your old Igloo finally gave up the ghost from the 1990s and it's got holes in it, or it's all beat to garbage, looks like trash. Yep, check them out. That's where you want to be. PatriotCoolers.com. Will also let you know that the world is not getting any less strange, as Steve and I are about to talk about. You never know when you might need to be a little bit more secure in your calorie count. And you can do that by going to 4patriots.com/Kyle. We always tell you to prepare or repair. Let me tell you this. When I first got these, they gave me a handful of like the 72-hour pack. And we went ahead and we just opened them up and cooked them up, which is why I don't have samples of their product. At least not samples that that are broken out. And the fact of the matter is you're not looking for 5 Michelin stars if you are starving, having been starving, having gone days and days without food when I was hanging out at survival school. All you really want is something that's warm, it's got some flavor to it, and it's going to nourish you with enough calories to keep you moving forward. This is the option, and you don't have to eat them all the time. I'm not saying you should replace them with your normal steak if that's what you're doing, but I'm just saying if you don't have something stashed away for a rainy day when things get weird around you, then you're making a mistake. Go to 4patriots.com/Kyle. Better than MREs, regardless of what you guys think in the chat, you wild animals. 4patriots.com/Kyle SERAPHIN. And I think that's where we're going to land right now. Let me make sure. I don't even know if, of course, because we had to reboot Steve, I'm going to have to re-add him to a scene. Bear with me, y'all. We're about to bring on the man, the myth, the Steve Baker. Hey, buddy. Oh, I got to unmute you. That's the other thing. I got all the things clicked. All right, we're ready. And there we both are at the same time. Look at this. How you doing, buddy? Is it my ex-girlfriend? Okay. Okay. All right. So now I've got people telling me they can't hear you. Of course not. Of course not, Steve. That'd be too easy. I'm stopping the recording there on this piece. Don't worry. We got this thing. We're going to figure it out. Let's go back to custom. Let's go back to this. All right. Chatsters. Steve's going to give you a 1-2 audio.
1 2 1 2 1 2. Can you hear? I heard a little echo that time, so maybe I'm there.
Let's hear it.
Are we good?
1 2 1 2.
Should we go back and talk about ex-girlfriends again?
We're back. Okay. Of course there has to be changes. By the way, I don't ever mess with these settings. I don't need to mess with these settings except when someone comes on and it gets crazy. All right, now the chat's going nuts with that. We hear you now.
All right, awesome.
Okay, so Steve, you made good plans just like mine. They fell apart. They heard the punchline. It wasn't my ex-girlfriend. What ex-girlfriend were you dreaming of?
Well,
if not mine.
I probably shouldn't mention her by name, but I've never dreamed of. It's amazing with what I've gone through for the last 3 years. I've never dreamed about your ex-girlfriend. I've only drunk texted him on occasion, so there's
I like that you called my ex-girlfriend a him. We're having some gender bending thing. Look, and that suits. All right. So for those who have never heard Steve Baker, who I'll have to chop out that early part where we had no audio. That's a shame. All right. For those who have never heard of you, who don't know your story, let's start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. Let's talk about, because we've done hours and hours and hours of conversation, you and I.
Right.
And the first time you were on, I was reminiscing with my father about this the other day. The first time that you were on my program was right off a very short hit that you did with Tucker Carlson, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
And then we went like Joe Rogan territory, 3+ hours, nonstop, pee breaks required, all of that. And we've come a long ways from that moment. That was a lifetime ago.
Well, look, there's so much that has happened, and I was reminiscing about that this morning as well, trying to figure out where we should start today. And I don't even remember what our last because our last conversation was
prior to you going and getting arrested in the little pill box.
Yeah, 2 or 3 hours in and of itself. And of course, obviously, you and I chat offline. We have a regular ongoing conversation almost daily about the things that both of us are up against and dealing with on a daily basis. But having said that, I don't remember what the last stopping point was in this journey that we're both on at the time. And certainly we haven't spoken since my arrest. We haven't spoken since I got to bless the magistrate in Dallas in leg chains. And then, yesterday I was my actual arraignment in front of my actual judge. And so there's a lot to talk about there as well. And to be honest with you, even though my attorneys are always, they've got their nuts up in their throat whenever I'm doing an interview because they never know what I'm going to say, I still don't feel, I don't feel much in the way of restrictions. I don't feel much in the way of limiting my speech. I have no intention to do so. And I have to be maybe a little bit more careful about a couple of specific things, but other than that,
we don't need to hurt any judge's feelings. That's not going to benefit anybody.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And I actually want to talk about Judge Cooper today.
All right. Well, we're going to do that too. So let's start. I think, like I said, let's start at the beginning. And I'm glad you've got coffee there. We're gonna hydrate as needed. Let's begin with who you are as a person, and we will work up to the fact that you were an unaffiliated, independent, self-funded journalist on January 6th. So let's talk about the person. And here's why I think this. I have been considering a lot because I get a lot of input from my father now. And I know that your father was instrumental in some of the ways that you think. And that's something you've shared with me. And I get input from my father now because I'm kind of in the business, similar, at least related business to what my father used to do. And who knew that you would be doing something similar as well. And maybe we have that parallel track. So let's go back to where you grew up, just a full recap, maybe 5-6 minutes of who you are as a human being, where you came from and how you grew up and what you saw growing up around your family.
Yeah, we'll do the quick elevator pitch here on that. But my story started in Louisiana. I was born into a very religious Southern fundamentalist Pentecostal family. My dad was actually a dual career guy. He was a preacher and he was a private investigator, and he had some success at both. He had quite a bit of notoriety as a private investigator, even covered by national news organizations because some of the stories that he worked on. And then as a result of the my life's goal, or the career path, which was as a musician, because all I ever wanted to do was play trumpet. I became fascinated with music at a very young age. I was actually more fascinated with trombone, but I was about 11 years old, and we were moving, and the last load of gear that we had was in the garage at our old house, and we were moving to the new house. By the time we got back with the U-Haul to pick up the last load, somebody had come in and stolen all of the rest of our stuff, and that included everything from my bedroom. So my trombone, my G.I. Joe collection, my NFL trading cards, and I had 8x10 signed glossies of all of the classic 1960s Green Bay Packers, the Lombardi era Packers. I had them all. All of that got stolen.
That's hard.
And
you're 11.
That's the one that hurts me the most, is because I have no idea, not that what they would be worth today, but it was such a significant part of my life as a young child, because everything in that era was about Lombardi to me and all of his players. And so I got a $1 a week allowance, Kyle, $1 a week. This was back in 66, 67, back in that era. And I used my $1 per week allowance. I'd put it in an envelope. I would address it to the Green Bay Packers. I would send it up to them, and they would send me whichever of the Green Bay Packers wanted, in a black and white 8x10 signed of them and of that particular player. And every week I would get with this large manila envelope with the Green Bay Packers sticker on it, with their logo from them. And it was like, my heart would just beat out of my chest, and I'd rip that thing out open. It would be Bart Starr. It would be Paul Hornung. It would be, Jerry Kramer, whoever it was, all the greats from that era. And so what
a great program, by the way, that they came up with in the front office there to do that.
Yeah, back then. Yeah, because there wasn't no internet. We couldn't just, sign on and Google up, our Ray Nitschke and print out a picture of him or save it to our files. You had to actually buy it. But for $1 I could get that, and that's how I spent my allowance. And so I hated losing that, but I lost my trombone. And then my dad was a wannabe trumpet player, and he played in church, and he was self-taught. He didn't even start teaching himself until he was about probably 21, 22 years old, maybe even 23. And at the time we had a cemetery down the street from us where we lived, and my dad used to go down and practice in the middle of the night in the cemetery. And he used to joke that he was never good enough, that they would mistake him for Gabriel and come rising out of the graves. But the point being is that's how he taught himself. And then because that was the only other instrument we had, we couldn't afford to replace the trombone. I ended up becoming a trumpet player, and then that's all I ever wanted to do. That's all I ever wanted to be. And so I started on that path, and then I started getting the scholarship offers in college. I finally picked my school of choice and became a trumpet performance major. A year and a half later, I got a call from a band that needed a hot young kid that could play to come on the road with them, and I did. And I joined this band that changed my life. I was 19 years old, and I parachuted into this operation that I had no idea what they did, or I just knew that they traveled internationally. I remember that it was early January of 1980, I flew to San Diego from Shreveport, Louisiana, and they picked me up in a tour bus. And I started my musical career on an actual tour bus. It was all downhill from there, but I got to start right. And then
there's a thing on Amazon Prime right now that's about the folks that like the A-listers, what do they call them? They call them hired guns.
Yeah.
Did you watch that?
Oh yeah, I've seen the hired guns. Right.
It looked like it was going to be really good, but yeah, this idea that you're going to, just getting on the tour bus is kind of like making it to the minor leagues. You're still in this tiny little fraction of people that can actually make a living doing the thing you love, which is
that's right.
Really rare.
And believe me, we weren't making much of a living back then.
That's
doing
fair.
what we did, but I found myself 2 weeks later actually in a recording studio in San Francisco, recording what would be ultimately we were recording a demo to what would ultimately be the theme song to the 1980 Summer Moscow Olympics. An American band doing that. Worse, or not worse, but more interestingly, an American Christian pop band. How about that?
You know what I didn't ask you before, and I'm curious about? Why did they choose your band? How did they land on your group to do that theme?
Yeah, just 2 months before I joined the band, they were actually touring in the Soviet Union. It was a subversive, illegal tour. They were working with underground dissidents who were setting up concerts for them, literally illegal concerts. And then one of the things that ended up happening by, we call it a miracle. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But the bottom line is they were invited to a jam session in Moscow, a midnight jam session with two of their more famous Soviet era Russian bands out of Moscow. And one of the attendees of that illegal jam session was a woman by the name of Alexandra Pakhmatova. And she happened to not only be a member of the Supreme Soviet, she was also at the time acknowledged by chairman of the Communist Party, Leonid Brezhnev, as being his favorite composer. And she wrote not only classical songs, she even wrote a trumpet concerto back in the 50s. And so she not only wrote classical music, but she wrote pop music. A couple of her songs had been huge hits in, Behind the Iron Curtain. And then she was at that event, and she liked the band so much, the band that I would be joining 2 months later, that she actually handed them some sheet music and said, I've been contract or hired as the producer for all the music for the 1980 Summer Games, and I would like to hear you guys do an arrangement of this song and hear your version. So that began that happenstance. Now, I'm not going to say that she was herself a subversive or a dissident or whatever, but she certainly was instrumental in a lot of things with regards to our activities and our future activities, which ultimately led to me a year and a half later actually playing on Soviet Central Television, sponsored by Komsomolskaya Pravda, which is the youth edition of Pravda, the Soviet newspaper. The actual editor put us on the stage, knowing full well that we were a Christian pop band. And that was, that was kind of the beginning of that. And then from there, I did some other things in the Soviet Union that we've talked about before. And then my life continued largely and primarily in music in all manner, either church related or not, concert promotions, artist management, bookings, my own bands. I finished my music career. I say I finished it. I hope it's not completely over, but I did retire my bands just back in December of last year so that I could focus on what I'm doing more without that interference. But the bottom line is the last 22 years of my life, I was back into live performance again as my primary source of income, which led us to COVID and the lockdowns, which then took my job away from me. I had 3 bands at the time. The 3 bands were doing very, very well. And then suddenly we weren't allowed to work for a year and a half. North Carolina, where I live now, was one of the I think I'd read somewhere it was the 4th most locked down state because of the type of governor we had. And of course, our state health director is now the head of the CDC.
No big deal there. No corruption seen. Isn't it interesting that the entire Eastern Seaboard, which I got to see the COVID rollout across the country, there were some places that really lost their minds and places that shouldn't have, that you would have thought were more conservative than not. Florida had, for all of the talk about Florida had, did you guys go down there at all?
Oh, yeah. Do
you remember seeing the waiting lines at the state line, that they were blocking people from certain states from coming in? They sent them into secondary while they were driving on an interstate?
I never had that experience.
I had that twice.
You did. Wow. Yeah. Now, my first escape was the lockdowns, of course, began mid-March. And then in May, Tennessee lifted their lockdowns on restaurants. So actually both of my kids, they were adults at the time, we got together and we drove over to Gatlinburg and spent a long 4 or 5 day weekend in Gatlinburg just so we could go to a restaurant. And it was a getaway. And then my next escape was just a few weeks later. I went down for a writing excursion down in South Carolina. They had opened up. North Carolina was still firmly locked down. And then I began what I called my TPC road trips. And I started traveling during those lockdowns and going and actually doing meetups with my blog followers, podcast followers. And I went to 28 states during the lockdowns just to get out of North Carolina. And so I could be with people and do that. And so that was really during that time is when I changed my focus. And as I've explained to you in other interviews before, I moved what had been the music side of my life, which had been the captain, had basically occupied the captain's seat of my life for 40 years. And then I had been, writing politically, especially as my hobby, and some other things. I've had things published in music magazines, and I'm a bit of a sci-fi nerd, but primarily political analysis and commentary, that sort of thing. And so that was my, basically a side hustle for over 20 years. And then I just switched seats. I moved my music career to the co-pilot seat. I moved the writing gig and investigative journalism gig to the captain's chair. And that happened mid 2000. And that was the reinvention of my life at 60 years old.
In music, there's, and I'm not a student of music theory, although I have at least two brothers that get it way better than I do. One of the things, and tell me if this resonates with you, because I always found this to be one of those things I was like, oh my God, what kind of people are coming out of my house? My younger brother, my middle brother, is capable of being a professional musician. He's incredibly talented. He always has been. He, was playing songs at 5 years old. He just would pick up the piano and go. And he did an interview with one of my brothers on like a YouTube channel years and years ago that's like no one's ever seen. And he said, I knew I might have a little bit of a talent for music when I started understanding the mathematical relationship for the next notes that had to follow the ones that I had just played.
Yeah.
And when he saw music as math and that they were, mathematical problems that needed resolution. Do you see music in that way?
I personally have, and of course I understand that concept because it is a mathematical equation. I've looked at it more as a language, a separate language than a mathematical equation. But there's also another perspective to it that I think is very important to even what I'm doing now and to what my father was doing back, when he was still alive and even 40 years ago when I would come off the road from traveling with bands, and then I would work for him in his investigative firm. And the correlation there is being able to not only see multiple things at the same time, because when you're reading music, you're not just reading one note. Particularly, God, if you've ever seen organ music, it's incredible. Church organists, it blows my mind because they're reading so many lines. They've got things going on with their left hand, their right hand, their feet, and then they've got all of their buttons and stops and pulls and all the things that they have to do. And all of this is notated in the music, and they learn to see it. Not only do they record what they're seeing, but they have to read ahead. You can't just read the note. If you just play the note when you see it, you're going to be behind all the other musicians. You will not be in time. So you have to learn to read ahead of a measure, two measures, or whatever tempo you're playing. Read ahead, save that, lock it into your hard drive,
and you're scrolling it at the same time. So you're building essentially like a forward buffer of what's coming up next.
Yeah, you can make that analogous to remember when CD players used to skip in a car really bad, and then they came up with the technology where it would read ahead and it would log in, a second, 2, 5, whatever it was doing, and it would basically create that buffer. So it had already read the notes or the music on your CD, your car CD player, before you hit the bump. And that way it stops skipping. And that's the way you have to read it. And so consequently, I think sometimes that has benefited me in a way that I see ahead while I'm doing what I'm doing. And I can see in more layers than the average person speaking the average language, because that's what it is. It's a musical language.
It's very interesting to me that it's about predicting what's coming your way, which we have both done accurately. I think you and I have both done that. I talked to guys like Mike Benz. He was a chess player, at a very high level. And chess players must see multiple moves. So it doesn't matter what the way that you learn how to predict potential, future runs. You have to be able to see that coming. And you and I, in our first conversation, adequately diagnosed that the only safe route is loud and public, and that our safety is essentially we're dancing in the light. And avoiding the shadow, knowing the shadow is moving at us at all times. And you have that same experience. You're even when they are going to grab you, which they did, right? They got a hold of you. But even as the shadow grabs you, you still know what the play is to find yourself coming back into that light where it jags back away. And that's the only way that that's the play, that's the margin of safety, that buffer zone.
Well, and that's a great point, because as you know, it's been well publicized that in the days leading up to me having to self-present or self-surrender, as they described it, the Department of Justice sent an email to my attorney and said they wanted me to arrive at the FBI field office in Dallas wearing, and I quote, shorts, a t-shirt, and flip-flops. And hell no. That was not going to happen.
No. And I love that you were able to consult. The other thing is that this is how you play well. You don't just play by yourself. Most people don't play as a complete soloist. They're either doing a solo in the midst of an orchestral piece, right? And so we're doing this as a team. It's very hard to get up and just sit down as a virtuoso and send it something. And it's also maybe less full than bringing in other members of a band or an orchestra. And we're assembling that. That is what the suspendables are, if we're going to play that metaphor out. So we have brain trust. I ping my thoughts against you. Hey, what do you think about this move? And you do the same. And so this is the one thing that I don't think that evil, I'm not mincing words with this. This is evil that our government's engaged in the same way that you saw evil in the Soviet Union. Real evil.
Yeah.
Banal though it may be. It's the banality of evil in so much as these are people just doing their job, just trying to get along. I'm sure those agents who met you in Dallas, which we'll get to in just a second, they don't have any personal animosity towards you.
No, they didn't.
They didn't know you. You're just a guy. You're just the guy that they're arresting today. They're checking off that box. It's the stat. They're just transporting. They're just the transport agents.
Yep.
Right.
That was it. That's all they were.
No personal grievance towards you. And yet they're all part of this larger tapestry of doing really evil work. I'm going to just remind people, we're talking to Steve Baker right now. If you guys are just joining us and you had audio issues in the beginning, go ahead and move through that. I'm glad you're here. Make sure you've hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and you're following it. We will continue to stick with Steve's story because Steve's story is all of our story. It's the story of the free press, which is the story of the First Amendment. And it's a story that if we do not defend our constitutional rights, then we have no rights. If we can't speak, the only other thing is action. I would far prefer the speaking version. Can we tilt towards your handle, which I'll throw on the screen again? Will you tell people where that came from and what it meant to you? I know it morphed over the years, and maybe maybe the evolution of your political thoughts as you've gone through this sort of experience too, and sort of slowly come into the investigative space.
Yeah, I grew up in what would be described as a conservative Republican voting family experience. All of my relationships, be they through church or otherwise, were largely conservative leaning, right leaning in their political viewpoint. But of course, back in Louisiana, back in the days that I was born, we all had to register. Even if you were conservative, you had to register as a Democrat because it was the solid South, as they used to call it. The only people that won anything were Democrats in the general elections. So you had to register to vote in the primary to try and get the most conservative of the Democrats that were, which, the Dixiecrats at the time, you could find them. They were there. That doesn't exist anymore. That all changed with Reagan. But the bottom line is so I was first registered as a Democrat. And then after Reagan changed things and there was this massive departure of the Dixiecrats to the Republican Party by the thousands, by the way, nationally, state, local, and federal level. And then there were, so I registered as a Republican. I always knew that I was uncomfortable there as well, but it seemed like the safe haven. until I got to the 90s, and I think it was 1998. I was at a financial conference in Aruba, and the keynote speaker was a guy by the name of Ron Paul. And then I had my eureka moment, because here was a guy with an R after his name strategically, but he certainly was not behaving as a Republican.
Right.
He was known as Dr. No. He voted against everything. And he proudly told us that he couldn't get big money donors to support him, and that every single time he ever ran for reelection for Congress, I think he served 11 terms, I want to say. But every single time he ran for reelection, the GOP ran a primary against him, another candidate against him. And he won every single time. And he said, and that's without the support of my own party and without the big donors. He said, because I tell my constituents, if you send me to Washington, I'm not going to be bringing home the bacon. I'm not going to be diverting other people's resources to my district. That's what I'm against. And it's either constitutional or it's not. And one of the most significant things that he said, and it really impacted me, and I apologize, I don't remember the cardinal's name, but he was the cardinal in New York. He was dying of cancer, and he was a revered figure. He had a long career, kept his nose clean, and Congress struck a medal in his honor, and they voted. It was the House, and they voted 434-1 to give him this congressional medal, the Cardinal of New York. The one vote was Ron Paul that voted against it. So Ron Paul sent the Cardinal a personal letter, and he said, I did not vote against this medal because I don't have the same feelings of reverence towards and honor, extending the honor for your career and what you've done. He says, I do. And I would like to say it even more loudly than everyone else. He said, it's just the act of doing what we did there is not constitutional. That's not our job to honor and strike and honor people with medals. So he sent him a personal letter of honor, to which then the cardinal responded before he died and told Representative Paul that his letter meant more to him than the medal itself.
As it should be. Yeah. And that's the hardest thing, I think, for most people, which is why I think your handle TPC4USA, folks will see it on the screen when you're back on solo again, TPC4USA, the pragmatic constitutionalist. We can have all kinds of great ideas, but if it's not the boundary, if it's not within the purview of government, it can't happen. We've gotten really soft on that. We're not playing the game of, is this within the acceptable confines of government's authority? What we play is the government doing the thing that I want?
Right.
And since the other side is going to play that game, we might as well play it too. If they're going to take for themselves, we must take for ourselves. We've turned it into a zero-sum game. And unfortunately, I think if you don't play that way right now too, the consequences are also dire. So what's a man to do?
I have to take positions all the time politically, which piss off people on both sides of the political aisle. Mm-hmm. And that's because I feel like that if we don't have, if we're not a nation that is governed by, the rule of law, the printed, written, it's very clear rule of law, then we're a nation of chaos. And that's where we are right now. And that's why we're so polarized right now. That's why this nation is more divided than it's ever been in its history right now, right here, because neither side gives absolute adherence, loyalty, and conviction of their every single vote to the Constitution. And because of that, they treat it as a flexible, malleable, document, and it's not. It never has been. It wasn't intended to be. But because of that, we have chaos. Because look, the courts should know what this Bill of Rights says, or this particular amendment says, and what it was meant. We have all that we need historically to understand why this was written. This is what this particular, even if the language is somewhat arcane, this is what this language meant. This is what the founders meant. If we're going to change it and interpret it differently than what they meant and as it was originally intended, then there's the Article 5 amendment process. All right, so we have to go through that. But instead, we have all manner of law, all manner of convictions, all manner of rulings taking place at the local level, the state level, the district court level, and then it's at the appellate level, and they rule differently, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until it finally gets to the Supreme Court, and you have no idea what they're going to do with it when it gets there. It's
right,
because
and
we're not a nation.
Yeah, we're not a
of
nation
law.
of laws.
We are a nation of the whims of man right now.
I did a podcast for Catholic Vote, and one of the things we just talked about was balance. And balance means that you know where the center point is. And we don't know where the center point is, because the center point could be anywhere along a string that has a lot of play in it, which is not how it was written. Those words are finite, specific, and as you said, they were captured at a moment in time, they were written down, and if you want to change them, we can do that. Yeah. We all have to agree, it turns out, that we're going to do that. And what a weird time to see that the so-called liberals that we grew up around seeing that called themselves liberals, which comes from the base of freedom, is the idea, and they wanted the freedom of the individual. These people are attempting to vote away not just our rights, but their own rights, their own civil liberties in favor of government tyranny, because the government's playing the game that they like. It's playing the tune that they like, but they can't see 5 sheets ahead in the next movement. The next movement is they come for you too, which they actually do in real time. They're actually still going after people that the left would lionize, which is pretty incredible. I think all of us have common cause looking at the, whether you call it the uniparty or the blob or anything else. It's really easy for us to look ahead and go, that's the bad guys. Okay, the bad guys is the empire. The rebels are the good guys now, as is always the case. The people who are resisting this sort of temporary movement of government sort of overreach that blossoms into all of our space. And you've known that for a long time. I've had that sense for quite a while, but I wasn't really a political guy. We're now stuck in this fight. Let's talk about the moment of January 6th, which I think was like an emotional climax, even though it's continued to build. It was a false climax because we dropped off a little bit and then we're still building again. Let's talk about what you were doing on that day specifically. Let people have no misconceptions about your take on what you saw. And we'll kind of keep it tight so we can get into the new developments. But I want people to understand where you were doing, what you were standing, the actions you undertook on that day, what you perceived to be the case then and then since. Maybe we'll go there.
Yeah, let's just start with the hardcore piss off both sides. Truth and reality of the fact is I went to January 6th not as a Trump supporter. I went there as a Trump skeptic at the best. I had become a skeptic over the course of his actual presidency, which was a far better position for those who love Trump and like Trump and stand behind him and call yourself MAGA than I had in 2016. Because in 2016, I was hashtag never Trump. Now I was also hashtag never Hillary. I voted for the Libertarian Party candidate, Gary Johnson, at that time. And the reason why I didn't vote for Trump was simply this. He had been on all sides of every issue over the course of his career. Now, he had never held a political office, but he had never voted for anything. He had never been in a legislative job or capacity in civil service. And he had also never been in an executive. He'd never been a governor or a mayor. So we had no idea how he would govern. But what we had is a guy that loved talking about political things and had for decades.
Yep.
So we had him over the course of his career, not only being a Democrat for most of his lifetime, but then in the latter couple of years switching to Republican. Okay, that can happen. It can also be a cynical play. But then again, because he had been on, and it didn't matter, pick your issue. We could Google up where he had been on the other side of that issue at some point in his rhetoric
and said it loudly.
And, yeah. And that's just the reality of who he was. I just couldn't vote for him. So I had him, I had my own scorecard that I developed. And so I had him scored at a 0 because I didn't know. I just didn't know. After 4 years of governance and coming out of because he particularly handled the COVID crisis particularly poorly, but coming out of that, I had him at about 50-50. So I mean, that was acceptable considering that the alternative was Biden, who I had at about a negative 15
Right.
on my scorecard.
Yep.
So I felt like at this time I had no choice but to vote for Trump in 2020, which I did. And so moving into January 6th, there was the controversy about the election and had it been stolen, and I was following and tracking all of that. I had not taken a position on it in any of my writings, articles, columns, or social media posts at all. But I was watching it, and I was asking questions about it. I was seeing things with my own eyes that other people were seeing, and I had questions, and I can see them, and I'm pretty good at math, and I knew that there were some serious anomalies taking place. And so when he announced that there was going to be a rally in D.C. he announced that on December 19th, and he said it was going to be wild. And I put it on my calendar. I was actually out doing my TPC road trip at the time. I was traveling around the country. And so I actually made it home by a New Year's Eve, actually arrived home from I think I'd been out on the road for about 2 months at that point. Got home on New Year's Eve, time to wash clothes and recharge my batteries. And then I joined a colleague, a fellow writer, a political writer who has been very successful. He's written political books. He's written for columns for some of the major online publications, as well as he was a ghostwriter for Rush Limbaugh for 2.5 years. And so he and I decided to ride together up from Raleigh, North Carolina, where we both live. And so we got up there the night before. We met a couple of other colleagues, and we had, our nice evening in the hotel room on the evening of the 5th with some adult beverages. And then he and I split apart from our other two colleagues. And the next morning after breakfast, we Ubered down to the Washington Monument lawn. I had my backpack with a tripod and my man on the street microphone and extra batteries and all of that I needed. I fully intended on setting up on the street corner after the speeches. This was my goal in finding out what people thought about the speeches, especially if somebody on the stage that day, Trump or one of his opening acts, unleashed the Kraken that day, which that never happened.
Right, which was constantly being threatened.
Right. So there was nothing new learned. And as a cynic or a critic or a skeptic about Trump anyway, I was analyzing it through my, I think, were fair, critical eyes, willing to be, as I did over the 4 years of his presidency. I went from hashtag never Trump to hashtag good Trump, hashtag bad Trump, on an issue by issue, statement by statement, action by action basis. It was just that. And again, through that constitutional lens. And so by the time we were halfway through his speech, and he was an hour late taking the stage, and we had already heard the prior speeches, that I and my colleague decided that there was nothing coming. The Kraken was not going to be unleashed. And we knew that there were other events scheduled at the Capitol that day. By the way, legally permitted events signed by the Capitol Police on the Capitol property that day.
Which is to say that there was a predictable algorithm to say that there were going to be a certain number of people outside the U.S. Capitol. And when you have predictable numbers of people, then you usually take predictable steps to enforce law and order and protect. And this is the real key, because I was part of this and I know what it looks like. You're supposed to protect the civil liberties of everyone by making sure things don't get out of hand. And that means having people in the crowd, which I have been one of those people in the crowd. I was on that crowd on January 20th of 2017. You try to make sure the people that want to throw firebombs and burn the Secret Service director's car are moved from the equation so the rest of the people can have whatever it is they want to do. Scream about Trump, celebrate Trump, all this kind of moment. These are all supposed to happen. Yep. So it's worth noting that these were permitted, and there's no negotiation on whether that happened or not, because it did.
Yeah. And in the larger picture, this is amazing. Nobody knows this unless you're, a January 6th geek like myself, and as I've been forced into becoming, is there were actually 82 permits for what they call First Amendment permits that day from all the various agencies and departments and policing agencies. 82.
That's a lot.
Permits that day. And the other thing, unless you are tracking these things very close, is that the Department of Defense both then acting SecDef Miller, as well as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley at the time, they both wanted to cancel all. They had their intel told them they needed to cancel all First Amendment protest applications, permits, and events that day and close the city down. They knew what was coming.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that information had been passed along.
And weirdly enough, and as I've shared with Trump's investigators, it was not declared an NSSE, which is a standard thing that happens when you're going to have a big event. An NSSE is a National Special Security Event, which DC has many. You know, they have multiple times of this being declared per year on a regular basis, including State of the Union and big parades and stuff. And they didn't do that. So we know that all this information was percolating in the background, that there are steps that could have been taken in order to go after the people that wanted to cause problems. There are normal steps that mitigate this, and that's how you get everybody involved, from the Department of Energy to the FBI, all the DOJ assets, the Capitol Police, who are not very great. And then you've got DC Metro, which actually has a pretty good riot squad because they deal with it all the time. All these things could have been done, and we know they weren't. Let's fast forward right up to the thing. Who drew first blood on that day?
First blood was definitely drawn by the nefarious actors in the crowd. Now, whether you want to call them MAGA, or you want to call them agents provocateur, whether you want to call them Antifa, whether you want to call them the feds, and as they say, the Fedsurrection. We know who drew first blood. It was not the Capitol Police. First blood was by the people on the other side of the bike rack barricades, staring at every one of them, which said, and had signs on them that said closed area. And I mean, it was very specifically spelled out. Bike racks were up. Every single piece of bike rack had closed area sign on it. And when they decided that it was time to push over, they did. And they launched themselves into the undermanned police line. There was only half a dozen cops there at that first breach point. And they worked their way, ran up to the second bike rack barricade. They breached that. Actually, it was a black fence. It was a kind of a semi-permanent fence, that a black aluminum fencing that had been put up for the inaugural event that was coming a couple of weeks later. And they breached that, and they came up to the lower west terrace there. The Capitol Police formed yet a third line without the bike racks, and then suddenly they were bringing bike racks over. More of the cops were. At this time now, Metro is beginning to arrive, and they're starting to arrive and provide reinforcements to Capitol Police, which had been already thinned out by a couple of pipe bomb warnings. So that's another story, as we know, all unto itself. And so at some point, just before my arrival to the Capitol, because I turned on my camera by the metadata at exactly 1:19 p.m., Trump had just left the stage 3 minutes earlier. He left the stage at 1:16 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Because my colleague and I, we left about halfway through Trump's speech and started working our way over to the Capitol. And the purpose was to get ahead of the crowd so that we could. There's already tens of thousands of people were peeling off. It was cold. It was windy. People wanted to move, and there was no meat coming from the staging there at the Ellipse. So it was let's go on to the Capitol and see what's going on over there. And we saw from the west side of the reflection pool there on the west side of the Capitol, something was happening. First of all, we could hear a lot of sirens. I mean, a lot of sirens working their way to the Capitol building itself. Because that first breach was at about 12:52 p.m., 12:53, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And then that went off on the radio, went off on the United States Capitol Police radio comms,
Which you've had ears on.
Correct. I've heard all 9 hours, 9.5 hours of both COM 1 and COM 2. Was that my noise?
Yeah, it was. I liked it. Good punctuation there.
Yeah.
You know what I haven't heard you say?
What's that?
I haven't heard you say that there were miles and miles of 8-foot-tall anti-scale fencing, which is used to repel people in events, and happened to be available a few days later for Biden's inauguration when I was driving around in there. I actually have my badge still hanging up on the wall, my access pass for the inauguration. There were miles of fencing that were set up, and that's what they use for any NSSE. All the State of the Unions have them. It's standard protocol. Where was that where was that in relation to the bike racks?
Well, the unscalable fencing was actually discussed as an option instead of the bike rack as well. And then additionally, there were another, oh God, I forget how many they said, but there were another 4,000 racks over in the across the street from the building, exactly across the street in the Fairchild building from the DNC. And of course, when the pipe bomb was discovered there, that building was blocked off, and they could not bring additional bike racking reinforcements over to the Capitol. And they were actually already had the trucks there ready to start hauling them over.
Bike racks are not particularly effective for stopping people, as we saw on that day. But what's interesting, the anti-scale fencing, if anyone's ever seen it, it's 8 feet tall, it's chain link, it's usually rubber-coated chain link in black. It goes up, 8 feet, but it has a pivot on it so that as you pull, it comes back towards you at about a 15 or 20 degree angle. So you can lower it to about 7 feet. But now you're climbing up against yourself. And most people basically don't have the forearm strength, the body strength to get themselves over. And then they'd have to do some kind of a weird pull up. And it's wobbly. So it's really, really unstable. It's what keeps people from going over the top of it. There are ways you can concentrate and do it, but it's not easy. And they've got a ton of it in DC. I don't know how many miles they have, but I saw West Germany, East Germany between the 2 days. January 6th, you could go anywhere you wanted. January 20th, you couldn't go anywhere. You were absolutely locked down. There were checkpoints, armed checkpoints with National Guardsmen. So it's
and we could revisit, Kyle, you and I could revisit this and the particulars of this all day long today. I mean, we could go all day talking about the background information of what was happening, just like this. There are miles of this unscalable fencing. We know beyond any shadow of a doubt about what was discussed with regards to the National Guard deployments that day. We know everything and everybody that discussed it. We know ultimately the only thing we don't know is why were they not deployed en masse at the right time before things got out of hand. And we know who denied it. We know why they said that they denied it. We know that even after Chief Sun started calling for it, after the attacks began, that even then he was being stonewalled. Right. He was being stonewalled by the sergeant at arms saying, we're going to have to run it up the chain. And they didn't get approval until 70 minutes later after the first breach. But even after the approval, they didn't show up till 5:30. Yeah, why? I captured it on my camera when they arrived.
Well, and also that's typical government, right? It's like, it's not like the government is a nimble organization, and none of the government operators are nimble in any way, shape, or form. So there's no expectation that was going to happen quickly. Mm-hmm. All right, first blood, protesters or provocateurs, and that's not the subject of today. Let's sort of push through the story. If people want to hear this, by the way, folks, you can hear hours and hours of Steve and I talking on this channel, and I highly encourage you to go back and listen to the first 3 hours. It was the first time that I really met Steve, and we didn't have the camaraderie or friendship that we have. We didn't have the common cause at that moment, and so we just were two guys talking about what he saw, and I didn't know it. Now I know I have a pretty good sense of what Steve has seen, at least in his sort of boiled down version. You went through the Capitol. Blaze has put out video, right? Exculpatory, I would say, of you walking around. And you're just standing there, the most boring man in the Capitol. Is that what the video is entitled?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I had several different people who have interviewed me, either Blaze hosts or others, who have said that it was the 37 minutes of the most boring video they've ever seen, but they were utterly compelled to keep watching it. Why? It was one of those. I think because it was so. You know what? You remember what Tucker, when he rolled out his first videos from the 41,000 hours of Capitol Police CCTV archives of January 6th. And he came under so much criticism because they said he cherry picked only, the safe moments or the good moments or no, he didn't. He was just showing the other side. It's not cherry picking. By the time he showed his videos, there had already been over 2 years of mainstream psyop on the entire country, mass formation psychosis, because the only thing that they showed was those 200 or 300 violent provocateurs and their actions. That's all we saw for 2 years.
Yeah. And it's incredible because the footage is it's the same footage. You're like, oh, they're just looping the same guy, throwing the same punch over and over, the same guy yelling the same insults, right?
From a different angle.
Sure.
Because there's hundreds of cameras capturing everything that was happening at every event or every instance of violence. And so we got to see it over and over and over ad nauseum. And so all he did was just show a few moments, probably no more than 15 or 16 minutes of alternate view, and the left freaked out completely. He's cherry picking. No, he's just showing the other side. And I think the reason why my boring 37 minutes inside the Capitol was so compelling is that it was so different from what everybody has seen for 3 years.
And your story, I would have to imagine, is more common than the violent story by numbers. The number of people that showed up, whatever it was, a couple 100,000 people were outside of January 6th. A lot of people's story doesn't even make it on the camera. It's guy standing there talking, smoking a cigarette, high-fiving, goes home. Yep. That story we've never seen. But there's hours and hours and hours of individuals with that story. Then there's people that came into the Capitol and they walked around and they did what you did. We could probably do a 37, somewhere between a 3-minute, because some people walked in and walked right back out. They walked out the same door. They were like, nah, that's not what I'm here for. There are some people that 3 minutes, some people 37, maybe some people were 90 minutes that were just walking around, hands in the air, and then they're back out again as well. You could track that for probably the vast majority of the people that went through the Capitol. It doesn't make it right. I'm not saying one way or another. I'm just saying that it was utterly uneventful for most people, hence the 4 charges they hit you with.
That's right. And of course, the 4 charges are always they're hyperbolic in and of themselves, because you know better than I do, is that one of the things that is just modus operandi of Department of Justice is to overcharge in order to exact a quick plea deal out of the defendant. They can get their credit for their career advancement, their notch in their gun belt, and they can move on. So they try to scare you with a list of charges that are not supportable by the evidence in any way, shape, or form. I mean, look, you saw what my tweet was last night. My tweet was very clear. I said, I actually, gave the law as it relates to journalists entering a restricted space.
Yep.
This includes credentialed journalists. It doesn't matter if your credential says New York Times, Washington Post, or Congressional Gallery, which I have that one.
Mm-hmm.
I know what the rules are related to that.
And
badge.
yet we have a long, long history in this country of journalists following the news where it is.
Correct.
And so we may have some black letter law, which we talked about the flexibility in the law that continues to exist. There's what the law is and says, which we can all agree on is there. And yet then there's the way that it's actually enforced. And the fact of the matter is that if there are people that are destroying the U.S. Capitol and breaking things, which there are, there were on that day,
yep,
then that is the priority of justice. That's the priority of law enforcement. Law enforcement tends to almost exclusively overlook journalists because it's like, why? This is not the fish we're here for. We're trying to stop the behavior. We're trying to affect an outcome that's for the public good. We don't care who you are. If you weren't involved in the thing, if you were just walking around by, get out, we're here for the people that were throwing punches, that were burning things, that were breaking stuff. And this, by the way, I'm not talking about January 6th. I'm talking about all civil unrest moments. We have a limited amount of time on this earth, and so does the Justice Department. They have a finite amount of resources, so they focus on who the offenders are in order to try to stop it from future. That's they're not trying to get, recompense for the American people. That's nonsense. They never do that. Think about the big scams that are out there and the big frauds. They never get all the money back.
Right.
It's not about that. It's trying to prevent future bad behavior. It's like, well, that sucked. That was bad. How do we make sure that a Bernie Madoff doesn't do that again? How do we make sure that, fill in the blank person doesn't commit that crime again? Maybe they'll be intimidated because we're going to go after this person.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And that's the opposite of what happened for January 6th. You're experiencing something very different.
Well, this is what the law says. I mean, this is what, and as I was explaining, is it doesn't matter what your credential said. Unless you have, or as they say, an exigent circumstance, which means unless law enforcement allows you to be behind a police line or in a restricted space for capturing information, photography, news that would be in the public's interest, certainly up and until the point where you're actually interfering with their job and their duties at the time of clearing out the bad guys, then they typically look the other way and allow you in. And by the time I reached the upper terrace that day, there were already hundreds of people who had preceded me through that doorway and those broken windows. And I have on my own camera there was not a cop at the door. Not one, not 10, not 20.
That's an important distinction.
And they're all standing off to the side, either talking on their phones, texting, which I didn't have a problem with either, because they've been in battle for a couple of hours. They're probably, and they know their wives are seeing this back home, and they're texting their wives saying, "Hey, I'm okay."
Yep. And let me just interject on that. Having been in the middle of weird things, having a spouse at home who's watching all the live streamers on YouTube, trying to figure out, is my husband involved in this chaos? Because I've been there. I've been in that chaos. And you send that text. First of all, when you're in it, you're not looking to go like, oh, I better tell my wife what I'm doing. You're like, oh, I better make sure that nobody stabs me in the back. Right. I better make sure nobody, pepper sprays me and takes my gun or whatever that thing has to happen. And then when you get that minute, you put your back to a wall and you grab your phone and you send that text. Hey, honey, I'm good. It's real crazy. Lots of stories to tell you later. Hope you're doing well. See you soon. Should be done at this time. Or I don't know when this is going to end. I might be home tomorrow. I might be late. Whatever. Right. Yeah, that's normal.
I had no problem with that analysis in my personal frame-by-frame review of my own video that I did in the days following January 6th. Mm-hmm. But the point is that they're offering no resistance. There's no warnings coming from them at all, telling people not to go in. And so after hundreds of people had preceded me, I followed the crowd in. I followed the story where the story went, not even knowing, Kyle, that dozens of other credentialed journalists had also crossed that line and had entered into that restricted space.
This is the broader, bigger picture that I want to keep hammering home. We talked about it yesterday a little bit. The weirdness of the FBI going into my credit report is a one-off thing. I am a former FBI agent who knows what could happen to me. The problem is that can be moved at scale to anyone, including you, including the people watching our chat, people who are listening to this podcast. Because when you have selective prosecution and they are looking for outcomes, we are not living in a democratic republic that picks representatives that do the right thing. And then we have this agnostic government just saying, well, this is fair and this is not. This is black. This is white. This is on the left side of the law. This is on the wrong side of the law. We're going to take you in. That's not what we're seeing. What we saw was journalists who did the same thing you did, treated materially differently based on how they reported it, where they reported it, and what they reported about it. And those are not American principles. So it doesn't matter if you agree with what Steve Baker says or saw. And by the way, I agree with Steve only because I think Steve saw more than any of you did. It doesn't matter if you're listening to this. There is very little chance that anybody can say that they've stood in that room and seen the cameras. And I can imagine you standing there with the fourplex, as you explained, watching in sped up time every single angle of the Capitol Police footage of every angle of the Capitol on that day. Nobody's done the way that you've done it. I know that because I know what kind of, I know that you're a dog with a bone on this thing. And you know that's where your safety lays, is telling the truth. So if people want to look at this and go, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at the FACE Act violation. Sorry, I'm pontificating for a second, but I'm going to keep hammering this home. It doesn't matter if we're looking at the FACE Act or people destroying pro-life pregnancy centers and crisis pregnancy. When the government says these people are on the right side of the law, no matter how it's written, and these people are on the wrong side, we're only going to go after the people that we don't like. We are not living in a free society. This is the reason for the movie Police State. This is the reason why that warning comes out and it hits home. It's not a conservative position. It's an American position. And as you've said, you've voted for and against Trump. I am the same way. I also was a Gary Johnson guy in 2016. I also saw that Trump had a better outcome, 50-50 versus -15 with Biden. It's real simple if you're calling balls and strikes, if you are not trying to be emotionally involved in it. And I refuse to be part of that. I'm interested in outcomes, and I think that's the same thing that we share. This is the thing that my buddy Bongino talks about. If you're interested in outcomes, You look at what people's performance is, and the outcome is the government's only going after one group. They are seeking an outcome. They're not allowed to do that. Political parties, yes, sure. That's what political parties do.
The moment you posted, and then Steve and then Garrett showed that FBI had ran your credit reports at the time of your suspension, not, at the time of your hiring.
Yes.
I went, my God, show me the man. I'll show you the crime. That's what they're looking for now. Yeah. This is Soviet era. This is Soviet era evil that we're facing right now. And that is exactly what they were doing with you guys. That's exactly what they're doing with me. It's exactly what they have been doing for 3 years with me, is looking for that kill shot to charge me with a felony. At the end of the day, there's two primary reasons why they waited 2.5 years, more than 2.5 years after the first time the FBI contacted me before they finally charged me with a crime. The first reason is that we were quite successful with the press, beating them back. We had, even when I was an independent 2.5 years ago, I was still more successful than any other declared defendant that was going to be charged, that knew in advance, and making waves to back them down and go, oh crap, we're going to have to deal with a PR battle as well. This is not going to be something we can do in the background and do behind the curtain. And so that backed them down. And so then they spent another 2+ years trying to find that felony. And that was proven in August of last year when I got a grand jury subpoena for my January 6th videos. And the thing that makes us know that was for me and not for my videos, that they had the grand jury investigating me, was the fact that we had already offered my videos to the FBI cooperatively 2 years prior. So that was not an issue. I mean, Special Agent Craig Noyes could have called me up and said, hey, we're ready to, take a look at your videos now. I'd have either Dropboxed them to him or taken him a flash drive cooperatively at the time. And then we get a grand jury subpoena, and everybody from my lawyers to other legal affairs journalists, they all went, yeah, they're looking at you now. Mm-hmm. And so grand juries are not seated for misdemeanor crimes. They are only there to investigate felonies. So somebody at the Department of Justice, FBI, U.S. attorneys, somebody presented to the grand jury a case to get me on a felony. And apparently the grand jury said, sorry, don't see it.
No true bill.
No.
And by the way, that doesn't happen. Do you know that? Have you had that conversation?
Yeah. Yes.
Let me just blow the audience mind just a little bit. I would say that when a federal agent goes and sits to testify for an indictment in front of a federal grand jury, that the success rate is well over 99%, because you got it. You show up there because you have the goods. And I can guarantee you they thought they had the goods on Steve Baker when they went in there. And a grand jury of your peers, theoretically, just a bunch of people who get called together, and a grand jury just is impaneled, and then they just bring a bunch of cases. They go, okay, now we got this case here, and this is we were looking for a felony indictment for 922. This guy was an unlawful possessor of a firearm. He's a felon. Here's the story. Here's his criminal rap sheet. Okay, Agent Seraphin, can you tell me about this guy? It's like, yeah, according to police reports on this day, he pointed a gun at his girlfriend. He had the gun in his hand. Girlfriend recognized it as a gun that he had stolen, blah, blah, blah. Then they go, okay, then you walk out, and then they just vote, and they vote whether they're going to return a true bill or not. They think they've got it. It's usually a slam dunk. Grand jury is easy.
Yeah. They can indict a ham sandwich.
You can indict a ham sandwich, but what that means is that all I need to do is present, unless people understand, there has to be facts, but I don't have to present any exculpatory information. All I need to say is Steve Baker was there on the Capitol. He did these things. We believe he engaged in this particular felonious activity, and here's the evidence of it, with no mitigating circumstances. And then the people go, oh, yeah, well, there's enough there for us to indict him, which means that we will try him and see if it's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very low standard to indict. They couldn't even get that because people looked at it and they went, why? Like, I don't think so. Whatever felony they wanted to get after you with, the evidence wasn't there. They couldn't show it, even with snippets and cherry picking. It couldn't be exposed to regular people looking at something reasonably going, okay. Because there's just pictures of Steve walking around and texting and taking videos and being in the corner and not lifting, he's not running off with a lectern and he's not knocking over the ropes and he's not, graffitiing his name on George Washington's photo or painting or anything. That's just not it.
Right.
It's really hard to fail at that indictment.
Yeah. And
that's when they're supposed to walk away, Steve. That's when they're supposed to walk away and say, we don't have it.
Right. I'm working without notes today, as you are, and as you and I should be. I think you and I ad-libbing is stronger than anybody working off notes. But the one thing we don't want to forget today is to go through the process of particularly my pretrial restrictions that I'm operating under right now.
Just send it. Yeah. Let people know what they put on you.
Yeah, this is a big part of this story, is that when they finally came through with the 4 charges, when I finally knew what they were, I publicly admitted that I drunk texted Special Agent Craig Noyes. And I actually said to him, I said, 4 misdemeanors? Seriously? Is that all you got, man? And so I was taunting him.
Yeah.
And so one of my pretrial restrictions, the one that I'm most proud of, is that I can no longer text my FBI agent. It is in the court documents naming him.
Do not text your FBI agent. Can I text him?
Yeah, I suppose you can.
I might as well. Text him.
I am actually not. It was read in court twice. It was read in Dallas and it was read in DC. Both my hearings there, that I could no longer text Special Agent Craig Noyes.
You know what's funny is they shouldn't do stuff like that. That's the Streisand effect in action, because that makes me want to text Craig and be like, what's up, bro? Why are you giving money to the Democrats? They hate you.
Yeah.
Now everyone else does too. What a dumb move. You don't have to say anything about him. I think it's so sad. The minute that you decide that you're going towards an outcome, you're the bad guy in federal law enforcement. That doesn't mean everybody in the FBI is a bad guy. I have friends that are still there. I'm not mad at them, all of them. I'm mad at some of them. But it's super disappointing to think that the tribe that I thought I was joining, and I use the word tribe because that's how it is. It's a tribe. You're either in or you're out, and I'm out. It's very disappointing to see those people act in a way that is not becoming of the thing that I signed up to be part of. And the other really interesting irony is I joined a circle of brothers or a family friendship group that is bonded by values and by behavior and by demonstrable character on accident. By getting kicked out of the FBI, I actually found the group that I was looking for. I said that the other day with Steve Friend and with Garrett, producer Phil, and there's a couple of others that are out there in the background that operate and know. And you're one of them. And I found it's not a tribe, because tribes, you're just born into the tribe, right? Tribes are circumstance, locality, affiliation, the right paint. This is like a fraternity of brothers that said, these are the values. This is the code that we're going to live by. It just turns out that we all had that code, and I accidentally found it because we all did the same thing. We looked at it and we said, this is wrong. I'm not into it. I'm going to just speak the truth. The reason why they have such a hard time with you, Steve, is because you're not coming from this political ideal. You're not saying, hey, I'm Steve Baker. I'm J6 Patriot. Which, like Jake Lang is out there doing, who I won't go on his show because he has a podcast from jail. That guy is a snake. There's something going on there. We know all kinds of stuff in the background, folks. I'll substantiate this another time, I promise you. But you're not doing that. What you're saying is, here's what's true. Here's what's not true. Here's what the questions are. Why are journalists not following them? Oh, they're not? I will do investigative work. You have made me give up music to be an investigator, to follow in my father's footsteps at this the second movement or third movement in my life as I go on. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing the same. It's like, we're going to talk about the truth.
Yeah.
Wherever it goes, however inconvenient it might be.
And I've said that from day one about January 6th. I don't care who the people were that drew first blood. I don't care.
It doesn't matter.
I don't care if it was a MAGA. I don't care if it was Antifa. I don't care if it was a Fed. I don't care.
Right.
But I'm going to find out who. I'm going to find out who lit that fire that day. And I actually already know, but that's another story.
Did you hear that? What was the timestamp on this? I should look over at the timestamp. That's fun.
It is fun, but I have a legal obligation to connect all the dots, to tie all the threads together, put all the pieces of the puzzle together in order to present this to the American people when we are done with this. And look, this is not a brag, but I'm just going to tell you, you and your audience, point blank. The first time I ever had the opportunity to meet with Representative Barry Loudermilk and his staff, and I do believe that they're doing good work. Are they going too slow? Yeah, by all measurement and all perceptions, is it going too slow? Yeah, people's lives are still being ruined every day. Lives have been destroyed, and people are spending decades in prison because Congress has not intervened. But I also now know more about what they're up against and who they're up against and why the progress is delayed. And the first time that I met with he and his full staff in his office at the conference table, and we spent an hour and 15 minutes in that first meeting. And we stood up, getting ready to leave, saying our closing lines and shaking hands. And Loudermilk said to me, he said, we've been working on this for 2 years, trying to put the jigsaw puzzle together, but we didn't have the top of the box. And if you've ever done a jigsaw puzzle, that's what you reference in order to put the pieces together. And he said, today you brought us the top of the box. Mm-hmm. And so when I say I know who was on the Star Chamber that set this up, when I tell the Department of Justice, the FBI, Capitol Police leadership, right here on your show today, that I know who sat on the Star Chamber that framed the Oath Keepers, I know. And I'm going to put the remaining pieces of the puzzle together. And then when I do, we'll run it through legal at the Blaze, and we'll release it.
Yeah. When people, some of our chat was like, what do you mean you don't care about who drew first blood? The fact of the matter is you're not emotionally committed to an outcome. You don't have to go search that. What you care about is what happened, right?
That's correct. No, if I was emotionally or politically motivated by who drew first blood, well, then I would pick my team, my side, my tribe, and then I would blame the other side.
Right.
But that's why I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, and I say this with all sincerity. I don't care if the order came from Trump's desk itself. I don't care.
That it just matters what is true.
Yeah. And I will tell you right now, it didn't.
Yeah. No, I'm sure.
I already told you I know where the order came from.
Yeah.
It did not come from his desk.
Sure.
But I didn't know that 2 years ago.
Which is why you start off with whatever it is. Anybody, if you don't understand how to bring an investigation forward, whatever it is that you think is true, you should try to disprove it. It's the only way to do that. Whatever appears to be correct, whatever this is the easiest way to do a felony investigation. These are the elements of the crime. This is the person who's gone out there and we believe did it. Let's see if we can disprove it. Can we find exculpatory evidence? Because if we can, then this case is weak.
Yeah.
But if all you keep coming up with is affirmations that move you towards more felony information, more evidence that the crime took place in the way that it did, that you believe it did, you're like, okay, fine, got it. I can't disprove myself. I don't think anybody else can do it either. Then we bring the case. And in the case of your indictment, which is why it's so shocking, they brought whatever it is that they thought without being conflicting. They didn't have to even go and try to disprove it. They just said, here, can we find any evidence that shows that it happened? And they couldn't even get that done. Yeah. This is the weakness of our DOJ right now, but that's what weaponized government looks like. They're looking for an outcome. You're looking for an answer. That's the difference. Yeah. Outcomes or answers. You only really get to pick two. You can either go out there and find out what the truth is, capital T, this is what happened and my closest human approximation of it in all our imperfections, or you can say, I have an answer that I'd like to arrive at. I wonder if I can prove it.
I wonder why that's so hard for so many to understand. It's because it's the simplest concept I know. I'm either looking for an outcome because I'm predisposed to a particular answer, or I'm looking for the truth. That's it. And I am not looking for an outcome in this 3-year and plus investigation that I've been involved with right now. I am looking for the truth, and the picture is becoming clearer and clearer. It's becoming more and more into focus with every passing month as I work through this and put the pieces of those puzzles together. And I will tell you, Kyle, that the most and you've already dealt with this before I did, but since my I hate calling it an arrest. Yeah, technically it was an arrest.
That's how they statted it.
I know, and I hate calling it that because, hey, they contacted us, by phone and said, hey, pick a day and we'll work with you on your day. And
even that, though, I mean, the fact of the matter is, arrest, what does it equal? What is that? That means you are no longer free to go. You have been arrested, which means you have been stopped in the forward progress of your life, and you have now been taken into custody, which all happened. And then they have detained you against your will, not because you were excited, even if you voluntarily went there. You didn't say, well, Kyle, you know what I think I'm going to do today? I'm going to go turn myself into the FBI and see if they chain me up and march me around and put me in a cell with a meth head. No, that's not what you chose to do. So that's what an arrest is. What you're settling on there is that sort of survivor's guilt. You didn't have the same experience of someone kicking down your door.
Yeah, maybe there's a touch of that, but where I was going with that is probably interconnected. Is that because of the nature of my arrest, the crazies are coming out of the woodwork now.
I like them.
I'm the Fed now. Yeah. I'm the I'm running a psyop. The Blaze Mormon Mafia, the Blaze Proud Boy Mafia. I mean, you can't believe all of the ways that this is being characterized right now.
I can.
Oh, yes, you can. Yes, I know you can.
Do you know where this comes from, though, Steve? And I'll let you finish that shot in one sec. But let me just give the audience a taste of what I think this happens. What happened is in 2020, we had an unbelievable weird reaction to something that has never happened before, and people lost faith in institutions, including churches, the media, the government, and law enforcement. And when they lost that faith in institutions, when those anchors chains were cut, they had two choices. I don't believe anything from anybody. I am now a skeptic permanently, and I think that's where you and I landed.
Yeah.
The alternative was, I now believe anything that I think because nobody else can tell me what to think. And and Steve Baker is a Fed, and Kyle Seraphin is a Fed. Because I feel like it. Because it feels good to say it. Because I'm emotional and I don't have any sort of facts, but I don't need facts anymore. Facts are not the world we live in. So when we take facts out of the equation, then people can do one of two things: not trust anything or trust whatever's in their head, which is not a good thing to do.
There's basically three types of attacks that I'm facing right now. The first one is actually one I can understand and I can sympathize with, is the fact that there are other January 6 defendants who have been treated far worse than I've been treated, who have been completely abused by the system. Their rights have been trampled upon. There's been no desire by the Department of Justice to adhere to anything resembling a recognition of the due process, and some of those people are a little bit red-assed at me because I've gotten more attention now than anybody else. I've gotten more attention. My arrest alone ultimately had more views, more hits, more clicks than the entirety of the 5-month Proud Boys trial, than the entirety of the 9-week Oath Keepers trial.
You want to tell people why that is? Because I know why it is, but you may not. Maybe you don't. Maybe you haven't thought about it.
No, I'll tell you what. I'll hold on to reasons number 2 and 3 while you run us through that.
Okay. The reason that Steve Baker's arrest and his prosecution has gotten as much notoriety as it has are twofold. Thing number one, the DOJ was working up to a Steve Baker attack. So they built it up on their own by waiting as long as they did and saying they were going to do something and not doing it and giving evidence for that. That made it obviously politically motivated because they said they were going to do something, didn't follow through on it until it was appropriate, and they felt like they had enough steam head behind them to do it. And the second reason is because of the work put in, which is primarily you specifically determining that your fate is going to be reliant on your survival and your ability to do what you're doing, which means a ton of sweat equity went into that particular situation. You spent a ton of time on the ground. You continued to do the work, not looking for outcomes, but looking for answers. And you went after it hard every single day. Every day, this is what you and I talk about when we speak. There's one story on your mind, and you got your single focus on that. That singularity of focus and clarity was what drove your story over the top, because nobody else did more work on their own behalf than you did on your behalf to try to stay on the right side. And it turns out it also benefits America, That's the dual benefit. It wasn't just self-serving, even though it does serve your purposes. That's my take.
You're right about that. They probably, DOJ probably rused the day that they did not go ahead and arrest me in November of 21 when they first threatened me with arrest. They were shocked by the amount of press coverage that I got then, and they backed off, and we didn't hear from them for 20 months. But the next thing is, let me just finish up the thought there on that first group. Is that first group has, I understand them, and I understand why they are like, dude, they locked me in solitary confinement for 5.5 months before I finally got anybody to listen to me. Or right. I couldn't even get a lawyer for 6 days, or, and I got 6 of them standing behind me. I get it. I understand it. And so my intention, and I'm saying this in every single interview I do now, is that my intent is to use this light that is being shown on my case to reflect that back on the abuses of FBI, DOJ, et al., towards those who were, in fact, more egregiously abused than I have been through this process.
You need to crack the armor before you can break through it.
Right.
And you you have an opportunity to crack it. So you're taking it. And I think that's important.
The second group of people are those who have sent me over a 2-year period their ideas, they have leads, they have theories, maybe even they have what they think is evidence, and they will send me these in long emails about a certain character at January 6th, or maybe it's one of the agencies, or it's somebody in the Department of Justice, or somebody at the Capitol Police, or whatever the case may be. And then when I agree to look at it, it's compelling enough through their presentation to me through a Facebook or an XDM that I'll agree to look at it, and then they'll send me all of their data over. And then when I don't find, or I can't see what they think they see, and I don't pursue it as a story for myself or the Blaze or whatever, then they get mad at me, and then they get angry. They're angry to the point of then accusing me of being controlled opposition. Oh, you didn't see what I saw. That must mean you're participating in the cover-up. Correct. So that's the second group of people.
100%. I get those too.
And then there's the third group, which is just pure outright effing crazy. They're nuts.
Yeah, mental illness is real.
Yeah. We had a guy who got on an airplane, flew from Atlanta to Dallas, landed in Dallas, taking a selfie video, telling me he's coming to see me at the Blaze headquarters. This is why he flew in. He's not invited. Nobody asked. He didn't get an appointment.
Oh, man.
But he flew into Dallas. Then the next day, he videotapes himself with one of his on-the-ground, followers from his thing there in Dallas, and they're videotaping themselves selfie at Daily Plaza, announcing that they're coming to see me, and they're going to bum rush me and Glenn Beck, and they're going to set us straight. The next day, Kyle, I'm doing a show. I'm doing the Sarah Gonzalez show. I come out of the show, go upstairs to the executive suite, sit down on my computer, and I've got messages on my Slack channel going, you got a guy outside. Our security had to run off. I go online. The guy's posted a selfie video of him walking around the Blaze parking lot, and then he got spooked by our security and ran off. Guy flew from Atlanta to do that.
There's a lot of people out there that the chat just said it. There's a lot of retards, man. We got to accept that they're real, and they're all over the place.
And they're
unhinged.
There was another lady who I didn't take her, I didn't take her story. I didn't follow it. But I had announced, as I will do on social media, when I'm going to cover a particular trial or whatever in DC. And in this particular instance, I was covering the Oath Keeper sentencing hearing. So I think that was back in May of last year. And this lady got on a plane and flew from Chicago and got me in the hallway when I came out of one of the hearings. She was there. This lady who I'd already dismissed her idea, her story, had stopped responding to her messages, as you have to do, because they start sending you hundreds of them, and then they start attacking you, and then they start, telling you that you're controlled op, blah, 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 because you won't take their story, or you must be part of them, the people that have done this to me. And she flies from Chicago to DC and bum rushes me there. And to the point where finally I had to say, you either back off and back away right now, or I'm calling the U.S. Marshals now.
This is a function of whatever I believe must be true, because there is no institution. And if that's the case, if that's your motivating principle, if you have no North Star, then you're truly awash in the world, and you're going to spend a couple $100s to get on a plane and go yell at a stranger that you've never met and you know nothing about. And I had a guy yesterday actually on social. I wasn't going to bring this up, but it's funny. He got really mad about something that I posted, and it was like completely unrelated to what I posted. And he said, "KYLE Seraphin, you've never worked a day in your life, and I was enlisted, and you're a West Pointer, and you're a piece of shit." And it's like, I'm a West Pointer? Like, that's a really weird thing to think. First of all, there's plenty of available information about me. I've never once claimed to have gone to a military academy. I actually had a shot at the Air Force Academy and Navy, and I turned it down because I thought being in the military was dumb, right up until the point I enlisted at 27 years old. So anyway, so this guy's going at, and he's 100% sure about it. And he's like, I live in Haltom City, and I'm going to come kick your ass and break my boot off. It's like, dude, I live in Liberty Hill, Texas. Knock yourself out, crazies. I carry a gun everywhere. I got a gun sitting here on the desk right here. I got a 1911 sitting right next to me. Why? Because you're a classy old school kind of guy. I got a classy old school kind of piece here. And I don't understand where these people come from. It makes me laugh. It's a little bit disconcerting if someone wants to find you in person and do that to you. And
which is why we are now filing. We're now filing motion this week. It'll be filed by tomorrow to get the rights to my weapons back, because I had to surrender them.
Yeah,
I didn't have to actually hand them to the FBI or to the DOJ, but I had to move them off. I can't carry any longer. Before I self-surrendered in Dallas, I handed my Dallas attorney my Beretta, and he put it in his safe.
We should talk about that Beretta later, but okay.
Yeah, I know. I
hate it
in my hand. I like it a lot.
Yeah, you got to, folks. Let this be a lesson to you that the best carry gun is the gun that you carry. So anyway, but yes, they've removed your gun rights, which you've been convicted of nothing, and even if you were convicted of the thing that you did, that they claim you've done, right? Even if you were convicted of the misdemeanors, you still would have your gun rights.
Yeah.
What the hell are we doing here?
Yeah, let's segue into the restrictions that I'm operating on. They call it pretrial, restrictions, and there's a long list, but there's a really just only a short list that actually means something. The one thing is that I have to surrender my gun rights. Now, understand, again, as you said, I've been convicted of nothing, but more importantly, I've been charged with non-violent misdemeanor crimes. All right. Meaning, if I am convicted of all four of these, if I go to trial and I take a conviction, or even if I plea down to one of them and I'm convicted ultimately of that particular crime, because they're misdemeanors, I instantly get my guns back.
The process is the punishment. There's a reason why I named it that the other day for our podcast, folks. The process is designed to punish, and it puts you in danger, real danger.
Yes. I'm in real danger right now because I have people getting on airplanes from other parts of the country, flying and stalking me.
Right. Judges don't have that.
No. That's happening to me.
That's an actual demonstrable threat to your life that people are crazy enough to come after you.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's your right to defend yourself.
And not just flying to see me, they're sending me messages. I get phone calls. They are accusing me of wild ass shit that you cannot believe.
We talk a lot about on the show about what is and what is not an actual federal crime. Making a threat on social media, generally speaking, doesn't follow a crime. It's true threats that are covered that we say are not part of the First Amendment. Actually, I would actually even rule those out. I'm an absolutist. I don't even care. Like, true threat, just let me carry a gun and I'm good. But true threats are not considered free speech in this country, according to case law. There's plenty of it. People can go look at Brandon versus Ohio. There's a couple of other ones. Now they've escaped my mind because I'm trying to think about them. True threats mean that they have the willingness, the ability, the wherewithal, and they have demonstrated some sort of interest in actually carrying out the threat. Flying across the country to go tell somebody to their face that I sent you a message and I wanted you to get it in person from my face, that's a true threat.
Yes.
Real people, like, that will get you locked up if you do that. If you fly outside, across the country and do it outside the White House, you're going to jail. If you say that stuff on social media, I'll take it seriously when people start showing up, and you've had that happen. You've just given us at least 2 examples of that happening, maybe more.
Yep.
That's crazy.
The two that I know about. That's the 2 that I know about.
Yeah.
And so the other, well, actually my PSO, my pretrial services officer, I have 2 of them. I have one here in North Carolina, and he works directly for the federal court. He wears a badge and carries a gun. And he was on our first conversation a few weeks ago. He was just absolutely amazed at how lax my restrictions already are. Whoa. Because most January 6 defendants can't travel without permission out of their district. So I've got the Central District of North Carolina. Under normal circumstances, I would have to get permission just to travel to the Western District of North Carolina, or to travel to South Carolina or Virginia, just across the state line. I'd have to get permission from my PSO to even do either of those things. I do not have such a restriction on me, which is completely different than all other J6 defendants who have preceded me. My attorneys actually were disappointed that wasn't put on me, because especially the restriction of going to DC itself, because all other January 6th defendants, unless you live in the district, you can't go to the district except for legal affairs or for your hearings and your trials. That's it. That's the only reason you can go. The government did not even seek that restriction on me because, well, they didn't want the battle
because they know that it's wrong.
Yeah. Well, they not only know that it's wrong, but they also know that I've got the bullhorn that I have now that I didn't have 2.5 years ago.
Yep.
And as a result of that my to be honest with you, my lawyers were licking their chops. They wanted that battle. They wanted to make.
This includes guys like Bill Shipley, who've seen all of these, and others. You've got some other good attorneys that are in there. They know, lest I leave the field, Countervin v. Colorado and Watts v. United States. Those are the free speech cases that involve true threats. Let people, if you want the receipts on that, if you want to know what true threats are, you should know, especially if you're going to be speaking online. I know that you're safe on what the things that you say, but crazy people, go read the case law, because it's real. It's out there.
That's exactly right.
And they go back to the 1960s, so it's not like it's new stuff.
Yeah. And so my PSO is shocked that I don't have either of those restrictions. I just have to notify. I don't have to ask for permission.
You're just telling them you're going somewhere.
I just have to say I'm leaving on such and such a date and I'm going here.
Yep.
And then because of my very unusual travel schedule, because I don't really know where I'm going next. I mean, it's just the nature of the work I do. I don't know when I'm going to be in Dallas, DC, Raleigh, or elsewhere. I just have to say I'm leaving then and I'm headed there, and I'll text you my next move. That's it. Kyle, I don't even have a restriction on international travel. I am actually allowed to travel internationally.
It tells you how weak they know their case is. To me, that's what it tells me, because I've seen guys like Owen Schroyer's case, and the fact that he's still restricted from possessing a firearm, even though he didn't serve a felony charge.
I don't think so.
I think he pled to something lighter, but part of it was he had to agree to give up the gun rights. The other thing we've been telling him, by the way, you could do this too. I've got a guy in the gun store down the street from me who's a antique weapons specialist, and basically anything over 100 years old, including this bolt action rifle I've got sitting back there, those are not considered firearms by the ATF. And there are some that are even gnarlier, that are like World War II weapons and even before that you can actually own without being considered firearms. And that's the thing I would love to stab in the heart of the beast.
What's the name of the gun that Jefferson gave to Lewis and Clark? He had 2 of them. It was basically an automatic weapon. It was an air-fired automatic weapon.
Is it like a Sten or something like that?
It was like a Gatling gun type weapon, precursor to the Gatling gun.
Sure.
But it was a machine gun.
Sure.
And Thomas Jefferson had 2 of them in his personal possession. And when he commissioned Lewis and Clark to make their trip out west, he loaned them one of his.
Yeah, there are air weapons that will kill from 100 yards or 200 yards out. I mean, there's all kinds of wild stuff you can go do. I told Owen the same thing. It's like, go get yourself one of those cap and ball revolvers. You know, you got 6 shots and it's shooting some gnarly, heavy chunk of lead down range. That's really funny. Like, they're not firearms. You're not in violation of it. You look, laws have meanings, words have meanings.
Yeah.
If you guys are going to be technical and stupid, then we'll just carry not a firearm that actually shoots a projectile using gunpowder. Anyway.
Our legal team, and I'm announcing it's coming out. I'm not afraid to talk about this, but we're going to be challenging actually every one of my pretrial restrictions. That motion will be filed end of this week, first of next week, and we're challenging them all because there's only 2 bases upon which the government requires these restrictions. The first one is that you are a risk you're a danger to the public, and the second one is that you're a flight risk. I'm clearly neither. So they're going to make the government explain why any of these restrictions apply to me whatsoever and make them prove that they do, because they've already gone without us even asking for it. And they've already not restricted my travel to DC. They don't restrict my international travel. They don't make me require get permission to travel. And there's several other anomalies like that in my particular case. And to which, as I said, my PSO is quite surprised by that. And so we're going to challenge all of them and go, prove it. Prove it why I need any of these restrictions on me.
Actually, the answer is prove why the public needs those restrictions on you.
Yeah. One of the biggest ones that they're going to be challenging is, why do I have to notify my PSO when I'm going to DC? Because most of my work in DC is taking place with other branches of government, and that my having to notify DOJ of me going when I'm going to speak to the legislative branch is obviously a separation of powers issue.
It seems very simple, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's a couple things. Like I said, when the government thinks, and Bill Shipley has been very good about discussing this problem. The government has no interest in the outcome of your case, and yet it pretends like it does. The government is supposed to remain agnostic about the administration of justice. We are supposed to have these branches that come forward. The executive brings forward prosecution based on the work of the legislative, and the judicial branch is the part where it susses out whether you're in or out of bounds. Mm-hmm. And a win or a loss equals no result for the government. They're not supposed to care. The problem is that that's what we've seen, and I think January 6th is revealed in a good way to conservatives who previously kind of believed that. We kind of all thought, yeah, the government doesn't have a vested interest in this. Well, we know that they're weighing in on it in a hardcore way, that they have their thumb on the scale. They have their whole arm and their body leaning on the scale. Yeah. And I think your case is a great little microcosm for it. But even the way you just said it, the government's only interest is whether or not there's a public safety issue. So they have to prove not that the government is correct. They have to prove that the public is in danger because of Steve Baker, and that you may flee the country, of which you've shown no propensity to do.
No, my passport is expired anyway. So, yeah.
Oh, but you didn't surrender it, I heard.
I didn't. I can't find it.
Go figure. You know what's funny? I have a passport hanging out here that the government issued me, and they never took it back. They never asked for it back. So it's expired. It's just like an old state one. I mean, you know, like things happen when you have an old passport. They just sort of live in your house somewhere in a drawer.
You know, I thought I knew exactly where it was, but I've actually moved since COVID. And when I went to pull it out of the drawer where I've kept it for years and years and years and years, it wasn't there. And I tore my place apart the last 2 days before, because I had to actually go meet with my PSO on Monday. That was my first time back in town. I was back in Raleigh for the first time in 2 months on this past Sunday, Easter Sunday. And so Monday I had my 9 o'clock meeting with PSO. Yesterday they came by to visit my place and to, examine that my guns had been moved, and look inside my gun safe. And, they saw a lot of boxes of ammunition that they had questions about, and they actually said, you're going to have to move that. They didn't know. I said, well, the language of the restrictions just says the weapons. It doesn't say the ammunition. So they were, okay, well, we'll go back and talk to our supervisor about it. And I haven't heard from them yet on that. But yesterday, not only did they make their appearance at my house armed and wearing their badges, 2 of them. But then after that, I had my arraignment yesterday, where I actually had to plea, to the charges against me in front of my Judge Christopher Cooper. And so that was my first time to meet him, and we did it by Zoom. I didn't have to travel to DC for that. So that happened yesterday, and it was pretty uneventful. He did chastise me. Kind of gave me a little bit of a lecture, because what he had heard was that I was deliberately non-compliant with a couple of my pretrial restrictions. And of course, that was not the case at all at any time ever. I mean, as I said, before I even did my self-surrender, I handed my carry weapon to my attorney, and I haven't had it since. And then I was in full compliance once I got home, and I met with my PSO on Monday morning. And then, of course, I was complying with him the entire way. I was sending him texts. Okay, I'm headed to Nashville next week. I'm leaving on Friday. I'll be in Nashville for a week. That's what I told him. And then I asked him to give me a confirmation notice that he received it, which he did. Everything was fine. But somehow, somewhere in the translation, because my PSO, my North Carolina PSO, is actually a very likable, friendly guy, and I was enjoying talking to him. He mainly because he was expressing just like utter, shock at how, my case was so different from all the other J6 cases. And so one of the things that I expressed to him, not that I was not going to comply, but that that we were going to challenge a couple of things. Not that I wasn't going to comply. So then he reported that to the DC PSO, who then reported that to DOJ, who then said that to the judge. And then the judge, of course, issued me a minute warning back last Monday, ordering me to be in compliance with the things that I was not in compliance with. And I'm like,
it's a stupid game of telephone by some of the most mediocre people in the world, it turns out.
And that's exactly what happened. And so he gave me a 30-second lecture yesterday, and I did this inside my mouth with my lips. I'm biting my tongue.
Got to.
And when he's finished with that, he said, it's not your decision whether to be in compliance or to choose which one of these you're going to be in compliance with. You need to comply with all of them. And I said, yes, sir, Your Honor.
Roger that.
And that's all I said.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to be in that moment where you're accountable to rules that the other team doesn't play by and can misrepresent you in an obvious way. I
could have hit the button, because on the Zoom calls I could have hit the button, and I could have asked for a moment, a private moment with my attorneys. 3 of my attorneys were on the Zoom call with me yesterday. I could have asked for a moment, and I could have said to them, I want you to address the court and tell him that I have been in compliance the entire time, and that was the fault of your system, not mine.
Right.
North Carolina PSO to the DC PSO to the DOJ to you. Understand, Your Honor, you only know what you know and what you've been told.
Right.
What you were told was inaccurate. I could have done that. I had the right to do that.
Sure.
and let my attorney say all of that for me. But I just said, yes, sir, Your Honor.
Yep. There's no upside to that one, at least not right now. So this is yet another reason why your case has gone the way that it's gone, is that you've picked your battles, you've taken the shots that need to be taken, and you've held your fire when you need to hold your fire.
Yeah.
Which is part of the game. This is a game. This is reading ahead on that sheet of music, as you said earlier. For some reason, it all kind of comes back to the way that we're trained and our life circumstances. Who knew that person would steal your trombone and turn you into a trumpet player that got to go see tyranny firsthand, and now you get to experience it here, but you know what it looks like.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly right.
It's a very strange experience to be living with the rearview mirror, seeing that those curved lines, those crooked lines that we've been living on, all kind of make it straight in God's path. And I'm continually reminded by this, and this story is no different than any of the others that we're all seeing right now. How strange it is. Mm-hmm. That we just don't know until you look back, and in 10 years from now, you and I will look back at this and we'll go like, that's why.
Yeah,
I suspect. I suspect
that's the case. I really do. And by the way, I did plead not guilty to all 4 charges yesterday.
That's good, because we said, "How do you wish to plead, Steve Baker?" That was the name of today's episode, and you pled not guilty.
Before I left Dallas, I appeared on the Pat Gray Unleashed show. It's a morning program that precedes Glenn Beck on the Blaze TV and Blaze Radio Network, and it's a fun show. It's they do real news, but in a lighthearted, comedic fashion, often. And so they asked me, "What's next? When's your next hearing?" I said, "Well, it's on April 3rd." And I said, "That's my actual arraignment. That's actually where I plea out." And so Pat goes, "So what? Have you decided what you're going to plea?" And I said, "Yeah, up yours." And of course they all laughed.
Yes.
And that's why I say I'm not going to be restricted in my speech. If I'm in a comedic, a lighthearted, humorous setting, I'm going to talk in that manner.
Yeah. If
I'm in a serious setting, I'm going to talk in that manner. And the same thing with my ex post last night. I published to the country for them to see. I'm tired of you telling me that I got charged because I did not have credentials. No. Yeah. every single person with credentials that went through a broken window or a busted open door or crossed that barricade line. As a matter of fact, if you are a journalist, yes, exactly. If you are a journalist and you went to journalism school, journalism 101 is you can't cross into a restricted area without express permission from law enforcement.
That's right.
Cannot do it, period. And if you saw
Even
that
if you're
sign,
ordained into the priesthood of being a journalist that they made up.
yeah. And if you're one of those 15 journalists and photographers with wearing press badges that was standing on the line where it said closed area, and you saw people push cops over and run to the next restricted area, you have more of an obligation before the law than those of us who arrived after thousands preceded us and hundreds went inside and there was no law enforcement even visible. And when they were visible, they were talking on their phones and they weren't offering any resistance and they weren't telling us we couldn't enter. You have more obligation at that moment. If you're the fifth person through the broken window and you've got a New York Times press badge on, as that one did, you have more obligation under the law than I did.
It's the same as seeing a law enforcement officer who's off duty get into a shooting. You have more training and experience, and there's a standard that you are expected to live by. Even, if I get into a shooting, I have enough training and experience that it's going to be more than an untrained bystander. There's always going to be a higher scrutiny when you have more levels of training. So that journalism school should actually work against them in that case.
Absolutely. To whom much is given, much is required.
Amen
That's
to
a
that.
very simple concept.
All right, we're going to keeping your story. Let's make it a regular thing. Let's just put it on the schedule. You got the link. Let's just put you on every couple weeks. You want to come chat with us. I think people love hearing it. I love hearing it. I'll just book time with you so I can chat with you, because otherwise we don't always have these sit downs. And it's nice seeing your face. Steve Baker, let me throw him back up on the screen. Folks, if you're not following my friend Steve, many of you are. I can see that his numbers have climbed, which is awesome. Steve Baker, it's at TPC, the number 4 USA on X, Twitter, on True Social, and so on. Are you on Instagram too?
I'm not I'm there, but I'm not an Instagram guy. But I am still, believe it or not, Facebook hasn't shut down my accounts yet, because they typically do that to J6 defendants. So I'm still on Facebook.
They know too. They know too. They all know. They all know, man. All right, follow Steve. Steve, I got something funny. This is why I feel like this is the kind of people that should probably be cops with the U.S. Capitol Police. This is the kind of training I think they have in firearms and less than lethal munitions. So we'll just throw this on the screen because it's kind of fun.
Your instinct, man.
Jesus.
Yeah, he's definitely rabid.
Yeah.
He's definitely rabid. Come on, dude.
God almighty.
I think you, boy.
Damn! I killed coyote and they didn't do all that.
Wow.
Two hands, people, when you take a shot. This is what happens when you do the I don't care, I think I got this. That lady did not have that. Those were all bad shots. You can see they're all hitting the grass. Anyway, pretty awesome.
The first time that I actually ever killed a rabid dog, I was 13 years old. I was already very experienced with firearms. And it was just one shot in the right spot and it was over with.
Hey, Atticus Finch did it right. They did it in Old Yeller. You could do it in real life. Steve Baker did it at 13. Folks, put two hands on the gun and point at the target and then hit it instead of whatever the hell that was. Anyway, somebody goes, what do you think about that? I was like, women shouldn't be cops. That's the end of that. But actually, it's anybody who doesn't want to train in their profession shouldn't do their profession. And that includes journalists. So we can make that broadly. I got one little palate cleanser. Again, follow Steve. Make sure you guys, his handle is in the show notes so you guys can find it. One little thing for us to laugh about. In spite of the world being weird, we all still have responsibilities and families and people we love, and we should all still have a little sense of humor about how weird things can be. I got some daughters, so this one rang with me. This is my little palate cleanser, and then I'll say adieu.
Girls, I need you to get your shoes on.
Why?
Because I gotta go fight someone, and they have two daughters, and I need you to fight the daughters. Are you ready to fight?
Yeah!
You don't want to fight?
How big are you?
They're your size. Can you fight them? Yes.
Oh, yeah!
All right, let's go. Come on.
Jingle bell.
we need to be joyous fighters in the world. I love this dad screwing with daughters is like the best. I've got 2 daughters exactly that age, and one of them is smart enough to go like, well, how big are they? And the other one would be like, let's bruise them. So I just thought that was perfect.
See, my daughter is smart enough. She would go, I'll just hire somebody to do that for
well, they're, when they get a little older and they got their own money. Right now, my kids have to put their shoes on and go fight with dad. So I think that's fun. Right. Anyway, we're going to fight for our lives, and it's not always physical, but man, it's good to be in it with a tribe of people, with a brotherhood that includes you, Steve. So thanks for joining me, bud.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it so much.
Awesome. Folks, we're going to do a couple quick little run outs here. First of all, you guys can support the Suspendables, including my buddy Garrett O'Boyle. If you guys haven't done it already, you saw the shirt I'm wearing right now. There it is. It's the Night Ops version of the Last Line Substack shirt, and you should check that out at the-suspendables.com. Again, the-suspendables.com. The promo code is Kyle, KYLE. It'll save you 10%. You can buy a shirt from the O'Boyle Family Sweatshop, freshly minted, including the new Kyle Seraphin Show shirts. They're out there. They're available. You can find them. And let's lastly throw a couple up here. This is our affiliate programs. You guys, you can support the Kyle Seraphin Show with a tasty bag of meat. Yeah, I said it that way. Snack day. You guys want to keep eating nuts and other unhealthy things maybe? Maybe you're bored of eating peanuts on the side of your desk. MattHatJerky.com/Kyle is the website. It's Matt with 2 T's, hat with 1 T. Jerky is just spelled like a jerk with a Y on the end. MattHatJerky.com/Kyle. You'll save 20% with our promo code, KYLE. You can sign up for a monthly subscription if you want, so you regularly don't have to go, hey, what kind of crappy food do I want to go buy for today? I need to go get a snack. You'll actually have it on your desk. And it lasts for a couple months. It's real food, so it goes bad. You can actually stash it and eat it, but enjoy a little bit of jerky and get some protein while you're at it. The ingredients are all natural, and it's a good stuff. I'm actually making sure that they send me more. And I like the USDA Prime Flank stuff, just so you guys know. That's what I'm into. Also, MyPillow.com, if you guys want to support another guy who is in the fight and has been dealing with some pretty awful stuff. Mike Liddell says some wild things sometimes, but he seems like a really good dude. I've talked to him on a number of calls. And right now, you can get deals on their slippers. You can get deals on the towels. I told you we're going to probably replace all of ours when we move. It's MyPillow.com/Kyle. Again, MyPillow.com/Kyle. Save up to 50% with the promo code KYLE. Check them out. Let's do a 5-star review as we roll out of here. And again, thanks so much for my buddy Steve. This one is a long one, folks, so I'm going to have to just read it right off. This is from Thumper92436. I don't know what kind of name that is. Maybe you didn't even know Thumper, but here it is. There should be a Congressional Medal of Honor for civilians, 5 stars. Kyle deserves a Medal of Honor for his courage, going unarmed into a fight with the most dangerous and unprincipled elements of our government. I'm going to include Steve Baker on that one as well. While the bullets may not be flying in his direction, the knives are certainly looking for his back. Each of these podcasts are awesome in preparation and content and presentation. He is a gift to the nation. Every time I watch it, this is really long. I'm going to keep going. Every time I watch a show, I'm leaved impressed with their vision and integrity, but distressed by the blabbering Democrats and the lapdog press. One of the strategies of the far left is to simply overwhelm the communications through vast and constant attack, advancing in to any weakness and slowing any advance. I do worry that one of their goals is to goad conservatives into a Ruby Ridge. We keep calling it Steve Baker's Ridge and Steve's Ridge. You guys should know that. That's what we talk about on the side. The left needs to be reminded that it was a Republican president who took the nation to war to end slavery, and another Republican president who sent the National Guard to the South to remove the axe-handle armed Democrats who were preventing black children from attending schools. Today, no group suffers more than the open border, or from the open border, than black families who find that their first few job opportunities for their children, and they're losing it to the language, as many job sites are in Spanish. Their progress in school suffers from school's challenges dealing with non-English speaking immigrants who have very little, if any, education, dumping 12 million illegals into the large cities. Man, this is a serious one. And the points are all really well made, Thumper. The government's been providing welfare to illegals when they should be taking care of those that are on our books. Man, 100% agree with all that. Come chat with me offline. Thumper, you can send me a DM. We could have a long chat about all this. I really appreciate those kind words. We appreciate all of you. Folks, we love you. Make sure you've hit the like, share, subscribe, and make sure you are supporting all of our sponsors here. You can find the website. It's at rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin is where the main podcast is, and links to all of the stuff are always in our show notes. Follow the affiliates. Tomorrow, Friendly Friday, we'll have another Steve. And we hope you guys have a wonderful day. We love you, and God bless. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.